Hey BookTube, I'm back for another shelf tour, and this next shelf is my Penguin Classics, and I hope this one goes a lot better than the previous one, where I did my ancient Greek and Roman classics, and it was a mess. I had the Holy Nimbus of Light just swallowing up my head half the video. I had to break it into two videos because I was nattering on for so long that I didn't even get to the actual shelf until I had to break it up into two videos. So that was a mess. Let's hope this shelf of Penguin Classics goes a lot better. So the way I have it is I have two bookcases here, and then the Penguin Classics take the top shelf of each. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do this one shelf here of Penguin Classics, and then I'm gonna move on to the next bookshelf and continue on with Penguin Classics. And it really is just a random mix of Penguin Classics. They're not ordered in any way other than they're Penguin Classics. And I haven't really cared to order them beyond that, and so I'll get into the actual shelf or show you the books before I natter on for too long. But we're starting off with some novels here. This is Stella Gibbons' Cold Comfort Farm, um, a very comedic novel from the early 20th century. I haven't read it myself, so I don't actually know what it's about. 1932, so almost 100 years ago. And I just know that it's a comic story of, I believe, a woman goes home to the city to visit relatives, or from the city to a farm and visit relatives, and every single person in the family is basically a satire, like trying to, I don't know, trying to be funny in some way, and apparently it's a well-beloved novel, so I'll give it a try. Then we get to a book I've read, but just not in this edition. And this is John Ball's In the Heat of the Night, and it's the first Virgil Tibbs novel. It's a detective novel, and I had to read this in grade 9, and it's as part of my grade 9 English class. And it's the story of a black detective in the 60s. And he's from California, but he's in a different part of the U.S. And he's taken as a subject the most suspicious subject in a murder investigation because they think because he's black he must have done it, and in the end he becomes the detective to solve the case, because that's what his profession is in the area of California and where people don't care about race like they do in other parts. So in one part of the U.S., him being black makes him the lead subject in a murder, and in another part of California or in the U.S., he is the leading detective. So it's an interesting dynamic. It's a very short book, and I haven't reread it since. But I did find this used edition, and I thought it was cool to have it. So I'll give it a reread someday. And then I have a novel by Shirley Jackson. This is Hangs a Man. And a little bit battered. I found it used that way. It's kind of water damaged, but uh, I've not read any Shirley Jackson other than her famous short story, The Lottery, which I didn't care about that much. Um, it's got an interesting gimmick to it, but uh, it's not much more than that, at least in my estimation. But I haven't read any of her novels or her longer fiction, so we'll see how that goes. Uh, and how do I want to go about this? We'll just continue on with the books in front. Now we get into some very, very different types of classics. So those are like 20th century novels that were in Penguin Classic lines. Now we get into Descartes. This is Discourse on Method and the Meditations, and this is just a short work. It's translated by F.E. Sutcliffe, and it's just a translation of Descartes. I've not read this, but I do have a lot of Descartes in different translations. So that's just another one of them. And then I have uh, Jean-Jacques. I can't say French. I'm not even gonna try. So let's just say this is Rousseau. Rousseau's Confessions, and it's got his mug on the cover, which I'm sure he would have loved to have his mug on the cover of one of his books. And this is his confessions in the line of um, autobiographies, and it lays everything bare. But like all autobiographies, there's a hidden message in there that he's trying to portray. There's a certain light in which he portrays himself. So, always got to be careful for that. Then I have Machiavelli's The Discourses. His Discourses, the full title is Discourses on Livy. Or at least that's the more, yeah. Because it's like a commentary on his reading of Livy, but he ends up going in deeper, much deeper into his own political theory, and that's kind of cool. It's got a facsimile look at the front page there of the original, because this is untranslated. This is in the original there. That's kind of cool. But yeah, I have this full copy of the Discourses of Livy. I guess I should say who the translator is. Translated by Bernard Crick. Oh, no, he does the introduction, and the translator is Leslie J. Walker. So, neat. Grab another stack here. You go back to Rousseau. This is The Social Contract. And it's his slim, very famous work with the famous beginning sentence. It is... I don't know it off by heart, but it's a very famous one. I just have to go through the 100-page introduction, it seems like, in order to get to it. Man is born free, and he is everywhere in chains. That is a clunky translation. And he is everywhere in chains. Okay, I'm disappointed with that already. Clunky translation by Maurice Cranston. With a name like that, of course you're gonna have a clunky translation. Good lord. Let's see. Next is another French guy. This is Voltaire. Candide. And this is translated by Theo Cuff. Theo Cuff does this translation here. And just his satirical novel on religion and philosophy. And very short, and I hear that it's very fun. Like, it's a fun, well, fun and like humorous, but also, you know, it's supposed to pack a heavy punch, but I don't know, I haven't read it. So then we get to a work of philosophy. This is David Hume's A Treatise of Human Nature. So some David Hume here. This Penguin Classic is actually very disappointing. It has an introduction, but it doesn't have anything more than that. It has no scholarly notes or anything. It's just a short introduction. Like, the introduction here is not that long. Well, no, the introduction proper is like, I don't know, 20 pages? 20 pages, and that's it. And then you're thrown right into the depths of Hume without any help. So, I don't know if Oxford's edition of Hume does more. I hope it does. But that's all I have of Hume for now. Then I have Thomas Malthus. This is his famous essay here. It's an essay on the principle of population. And it's his work on political theory, where he gives this idea that one day there won't be enough food in the world to feed all the people, and that there's maybe a concern of overpopulation over the world. And I don't know much more beyond that, other than that this work must be beautifully written, because I've read the very first paragraph. I'm not going to read it here, but if you want to, go on Project Gutenberg, look up this book, and read that opening paragraph, and see if that doesn't want to keep you reading. Then we go into a work I've never actually heard of until I saw it used at a used bookstore. So I have The Obedience of a Christian Man, and it's by William Tyndale, the person who was killed for translating large parts of the Bible into English for the first time. And it's his translations, the ones that he did before he died, that a lot of them were incorporated into the modern King James Bible, so, or at least the 1611 King James Bible. And so he's an important figure in English religious history. I just didn't know that he had this kind of work out here that was published in English. Oh, cool. We got another front page here. That's kind of neat. Books don't do that anymore, and can't help but feel like publishers are cheaping out on us, especially if you have to pay $50 for a hardcover, and you don't get kind of cool artwork like that. And we move on to some very different types of classics. We get Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem. A little bit of a worn copy too, but I'm looking forward to this. Apparently this is her take on the trial of Eichmann, the Nazi who was in charge of, was it Auschwitz or some kind of death camp? Part of the Nazi bureaucracy. So anyways, and she reports on his trial after his capture, and I hear that this is a brilliant work, so I want to give that a try. Then we go on to a very, very different kind of classic. Like I say, these just aren't ordered, and maybe I should order them, but this is Birot. This is The Romance of Tristan, and it's a medieval French work on the romance of Tristan. So Tristan and Yseult, Yseut. It's spelled. I've seen it spelled like 100 different ways, but it's a famous love story where they fall in love through a love potion, and but the woman in the love story, Yseult, she is married to Tristan's uncle, and kind of evil uncle almost, and then King Mark of Cornwall, and the conflict, or this story is a famous love story in the medieval era, and it got kind of eaten up into, or subsumed into, the King Arthur story, where Tristan at one point is a medieval knight, but originally the story was a separate story, and so works like this have it as a separate story, but then as you go along, then they kind of mesh together, and then you get the stories overlapping a lot. And so in Thomas Malory, Tristan actually is a major figure, which is pretty cool. And then we get to a novel from an African author. This is A Grain of Wheat, and by an author I'm not even going to try to pronounce. You can probably read that yourself. The person, this author is a famous African author, so shouldn't be that hard to find. Kenyan writer, and a lot of his work is in the Penguin Classic line. And the most interesting thing for me is that this is not translated. This is originally in English, which always makes me interested in why that is. Well, obviously we know why that is, but still, it's considered like Kenyan literature, but it's for an English audience. I have a few more books on top of the shelf proper, and then we'll get to the actual shelf. Then we get to Vasari's Lives of the Artist. This is Lives of the Artists. This is volume 2. He was a Renaissance writer and artist himself, who wrote a bunch of biographies in this grand work called Lives of the Artists. And Penguin does 2 volumes of this. Not the entire thing, but they do 2 volumes, and I have just volume 2. I've not seen volume 1 yet. So I just have this volume 2 here. I don't know if there is a full volume in English available, at least not in a popular press. I know Oxford does a 1-volume abridgment, and even the Penguin 2 volumes is an abridgment, but I don't know. Maybe Modern Library does a 2-volume full set? I'm not sure. And then we jump back to an Icelandic saga. This is Laxdæla Saga, and I don't know anything about this other than that it's an Icelandic saga, and it's one of the larger ones, and I want to read it. Then we get to Marguerite de Navarre, the Heptameron, which is a play off of, or in the tradition of Boccaccio's Decameron, and then, of course, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. And it's, I think this is a French spin on that, or a French author, so a French perspective, because Boccaccio, of course, was Italian, and then Chaucer was English. But another book, I don't know much more beyond that. And then now I get to the main shelf proper. I just want to know how I want to do this. Let's start from right to left and start with this monster here. This is Rebecca West's Black Lamb and Grey Falcon. And it's just an enormous 1,100 page travelogue of her time in Yugoslavia before World War II. And that may sound quite boring, especially for how long it is, and it's an oversized Penguin Classic. Let's see if I can get, yeah, here. If I have the regular novel size here, you can see that it's much bigger. Or at least it's significantly larger, especially for how thick it is. How thick, and apparently it's a lot more than that. It's the fact that she's a really good, intelligent writer who's thinking things through on the page, and that's what makes the appeal of this book. I've not read it myself, but I'm looking forward to reading it myself, and I don't know what to expect, other than from what I've heard that it's a very good read. So. Then we move on to a very different kind of classic again. So we keep whiplashing between timelines here. And this is Ferdowsi's The Persian Book of Kings in the Penguin Classic here. This is not the entire work. This is an abridged work, even though this does clock in at over 900 pages. And it's a Persian epic, translated by Dick Davis. And it's a Middle Eastern work of literature that's I don't know when this was actually around between 950 to 1000. That's around the time when this was composed, and I know that there is a previous English translation of this that was done like 100 years ago in verse. This is not done mostly in verse. This is done in prose, but it does do that translation from 100 years ago does, in fact, do the entire work in verse, but it's hard to find. It's not even available on Project Gutenberg. I've tried looking, so I make do with this one, and see if I love this one, then I'll give that other translation a try. Then we move on to a 2-volume set here, done by Penguin. This is Orlando Furioso. This is by Ariosto, and it's an Italian. This volume 2 has a terrible cover, so I'll just give you volume 1. It's a Italian epic that is supposed to be fun and chivalric and humorous. And I have not read it myself, but I hear that this translation by Barbara Reynolds is masterful, and this is the entire work. I don't know if the Oxford version has the entire work. They have a 1 volume for Oxford, but I know the printing is a lot smaller on that one. This one here gives you a generous introductions and critical apparatus, and lays it out quite nicely there. I am very much looking forward to reading this. It looks like it's basically in my mind I have it as it's a medieval or Renaissance fantasy novel, but in verse. So which means it's going to be a lot more entertaining than at least my idea of modern fantasy. And speaking of modern fantasy, and speaking of the tradition of Ariosto, we get to The Faerie Queene by Edmund Spenser. I have read this in its entirety, and this is one of my favorite books of all time, just unqualified. I love this book so much. Edmund Spenser was writing in the mid 1500s, and he was very much inspired by Ariosto, and another one of the epic Italians in the same tradition. And he wrote a wonderful fantasy epic poem. Usually, it was a lot of people like to toss this off or dismiss it as an attempt by Edmund Spenser to suck up to Queen Elizabeth I, because this is dedicated to her. But of course, a lot of invention and a lot of a lot of fun went into this. Like it is extremely moral, but it's also extremely fun, and it's just beautifully rendered. It is so well done. I constantly think about this. I desire to go back to it many times. It's hard to because I don't actually have this with me when I have the desire to go back to it. But it's so good, and the poetry is just gorgeous. It's like honey in the mouth when you read it out loud, or when you get used to its strange diction and spelling and conventions. It is so good. Then again, we have another whiplash. We go to the 20th century again with Vera Britton's Testament of Youth. This is an autobiography of her time during World War I as a volunteer, as a nurse, I believe. And I have not read this, but it's something that definitely fascinates me. And I'm very glad that I found this Penguin Classic used, because it was something I was keeping my eye out for quite some time. Then we go to a French novelist. This is Balzac. This is A Harlot High and Low. And it's just one of these glossy penguins of one of Balzac's novels. He has many novels that he wrote. I don't know how many of them are available in English. I doubt all of them are. But this one is, and I found it used, and I picked it up. So I have a few more of his novels that we'll be getting to in this shelf tour. And then we get to Alexandre Dumas, the Three Musketeers. This is the Lord Sudley translation. Lord Sudley. I don't know when that was translated. 1950s. Wow. 1950s. So 1952. Just an older translation. I believe there is a more modern one that Penguin publishes now. And I do have another modern translation of this in Signet Classics when we get to those. But I have not read any Dumas either. A lot of the French, I'm very ignorant of a lot of French literature, other than, say, ironically, Proust. But then we go to English, or to England, and go to Charles Darwin. This is The Descent of Man. So when he when he published in 1959 his Origin of Species, he very much left out any account of humans in there, because, I mean, his theory was enough to cause an outcry and to throw questions on tradition and religion and all these kind of questions about human origins. But it's this work here where he actually tackles the subject and a lot more. It's far more scholarly, so The Origin of Species was actually meant as a more popular work. This one here, like, he goes into all kinds of stuff. This volume does have illustrations, if I can find some. I've always found them fairly easy, but I guess I can't. Oh, here we go. Like, illustrations like that. He's actually going into the science of a lot of this. A lot of the stuff that he introduced in The Origin of Species. So this work is like 4 times as long as his original work. So I have that, Origin of Species. Or not Origin of Species, The Descent of Man, sorry. Then we have Friedrich Nietzsche, a philosopher. Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Very different from Darwin. And this is his kind of novel, sort of. More like an extended parable, something like that, translated by R.J. Hollingdale. I've not read any Nietzsche, but I know enough about him to know that he was crazy, and maybe he liked it that way. But this is one of his more influential works, so I've got it on my shelf. And then we whiplash again. I have these 2 volumes. I could introduce all this together. A lot of King Arthur literature in Penguin here. So we start off with Cretin de Troyes. This is Arthurian romances. This is a selection of a few Arthurian romances. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 Arthurian romances. He was the original Arthurian writer. He was the one who took King Arthur from the little sketches in history and took took him as the basis for chivalric tales, and tells a bunch of them here. This is all we have of Chrétien de Troyes, but the most interesting or most famous aspect of his work is that the last story he wrote, the story of the Grail, or of the Holy Grail as we now call it, is incomplete. So he left the most tantalizing story incomplete, and that meant a lot of people jumped in to fill the vacuum. He was incredibly popular in his time, and a lot of people really took after him in his retelling, or his tellings of King Arthur literature, and that includes these two volumes here, which don't have any kind of author attribution to them. We have the Death of King Arthur, and then we have the Quest of the Holy Grail, and these are both part of what is usually called the Lancelot cycle. So there's this huge prose work on King Arthur called the Lancelot cycle. I think I have that correct, Lancelot cycle. But it's not available for translation in any kind of modern press other than these two volumes and this volume on my other shelf here, this one here, this Lancelot of the Lake. These are the only two. This is like probably 1/4 or 1/5 of the entire series. It was written in French. It's more likely a mixture of authors that came together to this big manuscript tradition of the Lancelot Grail cycle. These two are shorter versions or selections from that, and I have not read them I haven't read them myself, but there is an entire series that it publishes the Lancelot Grail cycle in its entirety. It's in 10 volumes. The volume 10 is an index, and it's from a medieval press, and it's extremely expensive. It's like $50 per volume, and I need to read the King Arthur stuff on my shelf already before I spend that kind of money per volume on that, and see if I'm willing to commit to that. So I'll just read the abridged ones for now. Then we get to the OG King Arthur. OG King Arthur historian, Geoffrey of Monmouth. This is the History of the Kings of Britain in the Penguin Classics. This is by Lewis Thorpe, or the translation is by Lewis Thorpe. And this is the standard translation of this work, though Broadview, which is a Canadian classics publisher, usually meant for undergraduates, we'll be seeing some of their editions later, but they did a modern translation of Geoffrey of Monmouth that I would really like to get my hands on one of these days, but I'll need to read this first before I can really justify spending that kind of money. And keeping with the medieval theme, we go from the Problem of Britain, I think is what it's called, to the Problem of France, and that is Charlemagne and the Song of Roland. And this is the most important book in that cycle, at least the ones that survive. And this is also the original Orlando from Orlando's Furioso. Comes from the Roland tradition here. And I don't know much about this other than there's a religious battle between Muslims in Spain, and however the battle went, I just don't remember off the top of my head. It became mythologized fairly quickly in this kind of epic poem. And then we come to one of the jewels of my Penguin Classic collection. This is 3-volume Arabian Nights. 3 volumes in Penguin Classics. We have volume 1 here. And this is translated by Malcolm C. Lyons and has no critical apparatus to it, which I don't even complain at this point, because you get 3 volumes. This is volume 2, and then you get volume 3, because they're all thick. They're all hefty volumes, so I'm not gonna complain if that's what it takes to have all 3 volumes. And I look forward to feasting on that one of these days. And then we come to another chunkster. This is the complete complete essays of Montaigne in the M.A. Screech translation. So just big fat penguin volume, very nice and floppy. I've not read much of Montaigne, but I'm kind of doing that deliberately because I want to go chronologically in order. Though I'm still stalled in the ancient Greeks, so it might take me a while before I get here, which is kind of too bad, but I just need to get my priorities straightened out if that's the case. And then we go to another big chunkster, but this one is a chunkster of a work I've read in translation, but this is the original. This is the Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. And this book is a masterful book. I actually bought this on accident. I wanted the Canterbury Tales, but I wanted the entire thing, and I bought this because it was big and fat, and it was Penguin Classics, and I was like, yeah, this will be the whole thing. And I'm right, this is the whole thing, but it's in the original. All of this is in the original, and it's just got lots of glossary on the bottom, and then it's got a ton of notes, like I think 400 pages of notes in the back here, and there are notes and a glossary, so you can reference the glossary in the back, and then the introduction itself, I think, is 100 pages, or give or take. Or maybe it's like 50 pages, but either way, it's a big work of scholarship. Jill Mann, she's the one who edits this monstrous volume. And this is actually the complete Chaucer, but I was looking for a translation of Chaucer, because I can't read this just if I picked it up and tried to give it a read. I've done that a few times, try to just sound out the words. You have to pronounce all the E's, apparently. But yeah, it's quite the work, because I have the Neville Cogtail Penguin Classics version of Chaucer, and that's the reprint that everyone buys and reads, and I've read that myself, and I just didn't care for it, didn't get along with Chaucer. But that wasn't Chaucer, that was Neville Cogtail interpreting Chaucer in a modern rhythmic scheme. So I wanted to give Chaucer a try, and this is the volume to do it, of course. And I don't really... And, what I was going to say is that the Neville Cogtail translation, no one ever speaks of this, but it's actually abridged. It's because Chaucer includes 2 very long sermons or something in his work, and Neville Cogtail doesn't even bother to translate them. He just gives a 2 or 3 page summary of what actually happens, because they're very serious. They're not actually meant to be funny, I don't think. And so the translator is like, yeah, this is gonna, if we only have a certain page count that we can actually do, we're not just gonna leave those out and include like a 3 or 4 page summary. But this has the entire thing. Let me see if I can get it. The Tale of the Malaby. No, I don't know if that's the one. There's the Parson's Tale, I believe. The Parson's Tale, because of course he's a religious figure. And then there was maybe the Friar or something. I don't know. I don't quite remember, but I know that it was in prose. Yeah. So two of the tales are not included there. And then we go on to the complete plays of Christopher Marlowe, which is a lie. This is not the complete plays. This only has... I bought this for one reason only. One major reason. It's because I wanted 2 volumes, or the 2 editions of Dr. Faustus. He's the original... he wrote the play Dr. Faustus in English, but there's an A and a B text. And I don't remember which one is which, but one of them is shorter and considered more original, like the actual play that Christopher Marlowe wrote, and then there's the other text, which might be the B text, which is considerably longer, but is considered a reworking after Marlowe's death. And I've read the shorter version twice, but I've never read the actual extended version. So I bought this thinking, of course, if it says the complete plays, they're going to include the A and the B text, but boy was I wrong. And so now I have this volume of Marlowe's plays, which is not a bad thing. I'm going to read through this, but still, I'm very disappointed about that. Then we move on to The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia by Sir Philip Sidney. And this is actually the reworking of that book that he did. There's two works of this. Same with Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. There is 2 volumes, and one of the original one is much shorter. It's called The Old Arcadia, and it was his original telling of this tale. But then later in his life, which was not that much later because he died young, but later in his life he went back to it and with the help of his sister completely reworked large sections of it. But he never finished that job, and so this volume is incomplete. But what most volumes do, and what this one does too, is that they just tack on the original ending from that shorter work and include it in here as an ending. Though some scholars dispute that as a practice because they think that's not the original intent, because usually the consensus is that his reworking of the story of the Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia is a lot better. It's a lot more inventive, it's a lot more playful, and it's just far more enjoyable. So I haven't read either one myself, but I do have the Old Arcadia in an Oxford edition, so Penguin republishes the revised or reworked edition. And then we get to the last Penguin Classic on this Penguin Classic shelf, and that's another Icelandic saga. This is Egil's Saga, and I don't know much more about it other than that I think he's a poet who also murders people, so whatever that means, and whatever that entails, that is this saga. And it's one of the longer sagas, but this saga is also included in that Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition of Icelandic sagas. They have a lot shorter ones in there, but this is like the main work that they include as like a bigger work. There's a lot thicker ones than this, but they only include this one in there because they only can include so much, but that's how it is. And that's it. That's the Penguin Classic shelf. I have another shelf of Penguin Classics, which are just as disorganized. So we'll be whiplashing between timelines in that one too, but that will be some other time. So I'll see you then, BookTube. Thanks.